Hi everyone, I'm Jaroslav. I'm a lead game designer in Nordcurrent, and also I work as a producer. And I would like to talk a little bit about interfaces, and probably as a developers, if you are a developer, you couldn't have avoided developing interfaces. And if you are just a player, a casual or a hardcore player, you have still probably had situations when you can download a game. And that's a great game. It feels good, it looks good, it has a wonderful sound, and then you just can't get into it because the control scheme is completely screwed. You can't really do anything without going through tons and tons of menus and other stuff. So let us talk a little bit about all those pitfalls, and well, I will also try to cover how to develop a interface which would welcome a player. So firstly, we need to define what interface is, because that's a word which is very common. Everyone, every developer uses it constantly. User interface, graphical user interface. But what it is, you can see a quote here from Bjorn Bachner, which I really like. It defines basically that an interface is a tool which is used to accomplish tasks that the players have at their hand. And that's a very, definite description, because from the moment that the humanity has developed tools, they needed some ways to use them. If you take a very simple example from non-game interface, but the simplest you can think of is a handle of a hammer. You need a handle to use the hammer. So when we talk about interfaces, we need to think a little bit about the evolution of where the interfaces come from. And currently, one of the most well-known, mostly used item of the interface, is a button. If you do a little bit of research about the button, we don't think about that, but the button is the most famous element of the interface ever, of any interface. If we're talking about gaming today, we cannot go without buttons, basically. Every console uses buttons to control something. You push the button, you feel the tactile feedback, and then you basically control something on the screen by doing that. However, in 2006, when the Apple has introduced iPhone, something has changed. Basically, the mobile gaming became a thing. Before, if you have been interested in mobile gaming, you probably know that it was kind of a searing ember. It was kind of there, but not really many people played mobile games actively. And you needed to know if your phone can support that, if you can get a cartridge, if we talk about the N-Gage, which is also probably the best known gaming phone before the iPhone. You needed to know all kind of stuff, and the games were not very good. But then Apple came, and they have introduced touchscreens. And that has changed the interface as we know it. However, if you look at the screen of the iPhone, you will notice one thing. It has buttons. It doesn't have physical buttons, but they are still there. You can see them on the screen. Basically, the interface still tries to emulate buttons, because that is an element which everyone knows. Why does that happen? Well, probably it happens for the same reason that we still use this icon for saving. How long has it been since you have seen a floppy drive last time? Yeah, basically it has been ages, and we don't use them anymore, but the icon is known even by kids today, and they say, yeah, it's a save icon. But what does it represent? Well, a save icon, probably. There is actually a demotivator if you know that stuff that quotes a kid saying, oh, cool, someone has 3D printed a save icon. So it's just an element which everyone is used to, and we try to emulate the item, well, by showing it on the screen. There is a whole direction in the design called skeuomorphism, which tries to do that stuff. You can see here some screenshots from the apps. The first is a floppy drive. We have talked about it. Then the second is a voice recorder app. If you look at it, the whole screen is taken up by a picture. Basically, that's just an image. It doesn't work as a microphone, but it shows a microphone. So the user which picks up a phone, he knows that it's a microphone. If it showed something completely different or that the user is not used to, then probably it wouldn't be as easily recognizable. And we only have the active part of the interface down there, 2 buttons and a feedback basically window. And then another example is a bookshelf. Again, you can see that it looks as a bookshelf. You don't need to show it as a bookshelf in the app, but if you do it, then the user can instantly recognize it. That is basically what skeuomorphism is. And now there is a lot of discussion about if it is good or not. And the answer, I believe the answer is pretty simple. It is good as long as the user finds it good. And as the interfaces develop and as the evolution of the interfaces go, the users get more and more experience with them. And skeuomorphism kind of loses its meaning as soon as the user knows what the recording app is, as soon as the user knows what bookshelf is. So let's talk a bit about the advantages of skeuomorphism and the disadvantages of it. So the advantages are the following. First one, it mimics the physical objects. As I have told already, the user knows what the object is, and if he sees it on the screen, then probably he will know how to use the app. It relies on user's habit. Again, the user knows how to use a microphone, you speak into it, and you hear your voice recorded. So, again, easy. It's easier to develop. You don't really need to think hard about what you're going to represent your app with. What are you going to show? You just show a microphone. Everyone sees a microphone. They know what it is. That's it. However, here comes the first disadvantage. It relies on images. You have to use a lot of textures. You have to use a lot of icons, gradients, a lot of colors, and that takes up space, and that is not very fast, and that, well, basically loads quite a long time. It's cumbersome sometimes. You could see that microphone app, which is a very good example, it takes up the entire screen, and all it does, there are just 2 buttons. You just press those 2 buttons, and that's it. But you don't have any more space. And then the third and the most kind of prominent disadvantage is it is limited by objects it's based on. If you have a bookshelf in your app, then the user will not probably know that he can scroll that bookshelf up and down. You cannot just go to a bookshelf and scroll it with your hand. That is kind of a thing that is not apparent because bookshelves do not scroll in real life. Microphones do not swipe or something like that. So you are kind of limited by these options. When you show an item from the real life on your screen, then that means that you need to make it behave as that icon in the real life. And as I have told a bit before, that as the user gets more and more experienced with the interfaces, he doesn't really need skeuomorphism anymore. You can develop many more options. You can develop many more mechanics if you don't use skeuomorphism and if you utilize the power of your device. The touchscreen provides you with a lot of opportunities to develop interfaces as you wish. You have a direct control. The player touches something and it moves, it does something on the screen. And as you can see, Apple probably they know that. And there is, again, a lot of discussion if their design is good, but you can see that they have moved from the skeuomorphic interface to flat interface. There are still buttons there. You can still see the keyboard buttons, but even they are not really volumetric. They are flat and they do not really represent buttons that much as letters. So this is the general direction the design of the apps is going, and the games is a different question. I will talk about that, but the design of apps is going that way, and the skeuomorphism becomes less and less popular today. So let's talk about games, how we control games. So the classic control scheme, everyone knows that, who has ever played a game on a PC, on a console, that it's a kind of a 3-level interface system. There is a user, then the user presses buttons on the controller or does something else with it, and then the object moves on the screen, and then the player gets a feedback. What we get with a touchscreen, which provides us with another opportunity, it allows us to eliminate one of the levels of control. When you have a touchscreen, you have the objects on it directly. The player who gets a game, he takes the phone, he can see an object, he touches it, and the object instantly does something. Of course, it's a still 3-layer system. There is a touchscreen in between of the player and an object. However, it doesn't feel that way. It feels as if the player is interacting directly. There is no this third level of interaction. There is no this gamepad or a keyboard or a mouse in between the experience. So use that. That's a good thing. That's an option that provides you with a lot of possibilities. However, a lot of developers still kind of try to stick with an old scheme of controls. But I will come back to the old scheme later a bit and talk a bit more in depth about it. However, I would like to give you an example, a good example of a game that uses this direct interaction. Everyone has played Rovio's Angry Birds. It's a wonderful game. It has been very popular and still is. So let's count how many things you can do simply by touching the objects with your finger on the screen. Setting the trajectory of the bird. You touch the bird, you pull it out, and then you can target basically the bird. Launching a bird. You remove your finger, the bird flies away. Activating the bird. Again, you touch it, it explodes or something else happens. It depends on the bird. Panning the camera. Again, you just swipe your finger, you pan the camera. Navigating menus. Again, one finger is used, it's totally fine. The only thing that you do with 2 fingers, which requires a bit more effort from your side, is 2-finger zooming, basically. And it's optional. You don't have to do it. So what makes this game great is not only the user interface, but the user interface has contributed to it. And with any game, it can either make your game or break it. So think about it when you design your game. Don't do this way as many developers do, like, yeah, now we think about everything in our game, and then we will design the user interface, and we will design the menus. It's over there somewhere. We will do that later. However, some developers still try to emulate the old ways of control, even when we have such a wonderful scheme, well, the direct control with the touchscreens. Has anyone seen this kind of games that use these controls? Yeah, it works. Of course it does, because, well, it's basically buttons on the screen. However, is it really the way that is the best? Because this is trying to bring the controller back into this interaction system. You don't have to do it, but you still try. And it doesn't work this way, because the controllers, they are tactile. When you have a controller in your hands, you can feel the buttons. You know precisely what are you pressing. And here your finger slides out, and you cannot, you don't have this kind of precision. So again, it has a lot of disadvantages, this way of looking at the interface today. First, it's obscured screen. Your fingers obscure half of it, or even more. Wasted space. You can really use it for something else. You can show some useful information in there. Lack of tactility. You don't feel what you're pressing. Your fingers often press the wrong button, and your character does something completely different than you have expected it to do. And low adaptability. So you can't really go away from this scheme, because if you're trying to emulate the controller, then you have to emulate the controller. You cannot place the buttons in a different way. And of course, it's not very ergonomical. As I have said, a necessary third level of interaction is not really needed in this case. Let's talk a little bit about how we play games. According to Steven Huber, he has conducted a research that has involved around 1,300 users, and he has basically tried to observe how users are holding their phones. So as you can see, about 49% of users are holding the phone like this, and they're playing games like this. With their one finger, they're holding it in one hand. Another group of users, 36%, hold it like this. So you hold it in your hand, and you use another hand for interaction. And then 15% use it like this. So as you can see, almost a half of users use the phone with one hand, and that should be kind of a prevalent way for you to think when you are designing the interface, because most of the users are going to play your game like this, or at least try, and if they cannot, you will lose them. So here are the heat maps that you can see. They are kind of popular today. You can find all the different kinds of heat maps like that on the internet if you look. These ones I like the most. I have tried it myself. They work for me when I try to play games. So as you can see, the screens are getting larger. That's a tendency, and probably they will keep getting larger until some point when the users will say, we don't want that anymore, we want small phones again. So, and as the screens go larger, you have the zones that cannot really accommodate any important controls because you cannot reach them. If I try to use my 6-inch phone to reach the top corner, I cannot. And if the important control button will be there, I will be frustrated. I'm not going to play that game probably because I will have to use my both hands to do that. So when you're designing the interface, please have in mind that the screens are getting larger, the players will be playing your games on their large screens, and you will have to think of how to place those elements so that the player can play it, so the player can interact with them in a convenient way. We have faced this situation when developing our games. We are constantly facing them. We are developing games for many different platforms, and this one is one of our most popular games and most well-received. It's called Happy Chef. And basically what the player needs to do there, he needs to prepare dishes and then to give those dishes to the customers that come and ask for them. And then he receives money, and this way the game goes. When we have tried to design the interface, we have designed it kind of for the multi-platform, for the PC and for the tablets and for the phones also. But when we have tried to play it on the phone, it didn't work. The player couldn't actually do anything because the items were so small and they were placed not in a convenient way. And we have received lots of actually complaints that the game is pretty much unplayable on their phones, and especially if the phone has a small screen. So we have redesigned this interface from scratch. You can see on the right is a phone interface, and on the left is everything else, basically, PCs, Macs, and tablets. So the phone interface has different placement of objects. It has larger colliders. It has, basically, it's a completely different interface. So that's sometimes how it goes. You have to actually change your game sometimes in order to satisfy your users. And if you are planning your interface from the scratch, from the beginning, when you start developing your game, you don't have to do that later. When you are designing the interfaces for the multi-platform, you will also have to think about the evolution of the interface. You will have to think about touch screens as much as you think about PCs. And there are some things which are completely different on these two platforms, and not many of us think about it when we create our games or we start creating our games before the game designer tries to play it himself and says, well, sorry, it doesn't work, we need to change something. So the first thing is sensitivity and acceleration with the case of PCs and Macs, and direct control in case of touchscreens. You can't imagine how frustrating it is for a person who is used to playing games with no mouse acceleration, especially hardcore players, those who play lots of shooters, competitive players. They usually switch off the mouse acceleration, and then they get the game, and it has this horrible input lag, or the mouse behaves in a completely different way. And especially if you are designing for Macs, you're going to face that because Macs do not have a way to disable the mouse acceleration. Well, they have, but you need to use a terminal, and casual users will not do that. So think about it. So basically, if you are planning to release your game on PC, make sure that everything is possible to do in the same convenient way as it is with direct controlled iPads. No convenience zones with PCs or Macs, and there are convenience zones which I have showed you before for the phones, for the tablets. Small collision boxes on the PCs and Macs are fine. It is much easier to hit a target with a mouse than it is with your finger on a very small screen, because your fingers are larger, the objects are very small. So if you are designing an interface, again, the example with the Happy Chef I showed you before, it had larger collision zones in case of mobile phones. Think about that as well when you are designing your games. Hover functionality is there for Macs and PCs when you just bring the cursor to an object and then you can just hold it there and you see a tooltip, you see some kind of effect. It's not there with touch screens. So if you're designing a game and you have an idea, okay, here's this unit and I'm going to tell the player what it is if the player just moves the mouse over it. And then you think about the mobile phones and the tablets, then what? How the player is going to get it. Touch and hold is an option, but it's not a very good one. It's not really intuitive. The player will not know that he has to touch and hold an item for an information to be popped up. So if you're going to do that, you'll have to do some kind of tutorial to tell the player that he can do that, and that's a very cumbersome way, not a very convenient one. So probably you will have to place the info somewhere else. Customizable cursor and no need for cursor. Again, another completely, substantial difference. You can use the cursor for the indication of some things. For example, the cursor changes its state. That means that a hidden object is there, or something like that. The cursor changes his state or shows the loading or something like that. You can't do that with touch devices. Again, there is a thing to consider when you design your interfaces. So, to conclude, there is a principle developed in 1960 by US Navy, which is called KISS. Maybe someone has heard about this principle before. Who has, please raise your hands. Okay, so quite many. It's very simple. It means keep it simple, stupid. And that is a basic idea when you are designing your interface. You should keep it simple. You should keep it understandable for the player. And I have kind of prepared several points that could help you. I'm not sure they did for me, but I hope they do. The first one, ask yourself, do you utilize the advantages of the platform? Are you using the platform at its best? If it has a touch screen, are you using this touch screen at its best? Today we're standing on the threshold of a new technologies such as VR and wearable devices, watches, and if you have ever owned a watch from large companies, Samsung and many others, LG, very often they still stick to the usual swipes like the phones do, and it's not very convenient because screen is small and your finger obscures kind of all of it. So again, this is probably not using the functionality at its best, the platform at its best. Do you need more than one screen per function? That's a very common issue. I do that all the time when I try to design a game. I try to design an interface and then I catch myself that it's not simple. The player has to go through at least 2 screens to do something. Try to keep it one. If the player needs a function, if the function needs to be there, if you are sure about that, then try to show it on one screen, no more. Don't force the player to scroll around, to switch pages or something like that. It's not very convenient. Is your UI intuitive? Intuitivity is a kind of general subject, but basically, if your UI is usable without telling the player how to use it through tutorials, through something else, it's good, it's intuitive. If you play your game and you find your interface is very good, you are satisfied with it, give the game to someone who has never seen it and observe that player as he plays it. And you will notice that there are many points in your game that the player is not aware of, that you are, and you will see all these trouble points that you have to fix in order to make your interface work. So, does your UI have a clear hierarchy? It may sound complicated, but what it basically means is that the screens, the buttons, everything in your user interface has to be understandable. I mean, the player has to understand why it is there. Because if the screen, let me give you an example again. The screen, the interface, which shows items, and then you place a button which brings the player to an information about quests. Why is it in the inventory? Why is it in that screen? It's not really hierarchy. It doesn't have a clear hierarchy. Are the right elements accented? So use accents. That's a really good point to show the player what he has to press. Probably if you're a developer, you do it all the time. If you want to sell some currency to a player and you want to sell more instead of less, then you'll probably accent the bigger amount of currency, and you will show some nice sparkles. You will maybe use the color theory in order to show the player that this is better, use it, press this button. You use probably the green color for confirmation, the red color for cancellation, and all these kind of things. Try to see if the right elements that are mostly used are properly accented, if you use the proper effects, if you use the colors, and so on. And another question, do you really need that button there? If you place something in your interface, try to think about how can I not do that? And if you find an answer, don't do it, because the more elements of the interface you have, the more player will have to learn. And that is something that keeps your user base from getting involved more. So that was it. I hope this will be helpful. I hope you will find some insights here. I hope you will use this short introduction into the interfaces and their evolution. And if you have also any questions, you are welcome to ask them now. If you have some big ones, if you want to discuss something, you can see my email down there, and you are free to write me anytime, and I will answer your questions. So.
I'm just afraid that we don't have time for questions. So, guys, if you have them, please catch Jaroslav while he's here.
Maybe one. There was a person there.
One.
Yeah.
Only one. Okay. If there's a short question. Yes, no question.
I have a very short question. So you showed the numbers for holding the phone, right?
Yeah.
You said half the people hold it like this.
Yeah.
So are you like this actually, right?
Yeah.
So are you saying that if my game is designed in a landscape mode, then I'm losing half the players?
No, that's not always the case. The players hold their phones like this when they use them generally throughout the day. The apps, some games, and so on. So of course, it's not an exact number which will show that if your game doesn't work like this, then it will not be played by anyone. No, of course not. Some people will play, but you will definitely lose some part of the audience. I can give you an example from my own experience. I often play games when I am in the bus, when I'm on my way to work. And when you're in the bus, you're standing, you're holding this thing, and then you play the game. And of course, if your game is designed like this, probably I will not play it at that time. Maybe I will play it later, maybe I will play it at home, but you have just lost me in the bus. So something, this is not an exact thing. You shouldn't think about it as a rule, but just have it in mind when you are designing your game that, some of the players will probably miss that. So I hope I have answered your question. Yeah, thank you.